And here we go, another episode of Adventures in DevOps. Just in case you had this queued up in your list on your podcast player and a new episode popped up, this is Adventures in DevOps. I'm the host, Will Button. Joining me, as always, Warren Parad, CTO of Authorus. What's going on, Warren?
Hey, thanks for having me back, Will. Like usual, I've really been struggling with the number of MDM solutions out there that are now just choosing this moment to have a problem. I mean, we had CrowdStrike before, and in, I think it was Singapore, Mobile Guardian just felt the need to make themselves known to the whole world as well by locking out all their customer systems. So, I think it really says something about MDMs maybe not the best solution for companies to be figuring out how to avoid particular security problems.
I think it's Hollywood marketing theory. There's no publicity or no, what's the phrase? I'm going to butcher it now.
There's no bad PR.
Yeah, that's the one I was looking for. Thank you. Because now everyone knows who those companies are. And so marketing is just having a blast with it. But today we are going to be talking about APIs because, well, I'll save it. There's a lot to talk about there. But joining us in that conversation, we have the co-founder of Lunar.dev, which has been in the press a lot lately. I've been hearing y'all's name pop up a lot. And so I'm excited to have you on here. Joining us, Eyal Solomon. How are you, man?
I'm good. Thank you. Great to be here, guys.
I'm excited because APIs, working from the infrastructure side, I'm never in anything other than awe at the number of external APIs our engineering teams manage to find somewhere on the internet, create an account, get it in production, and then we never know about it until we hit the free tier limit. And then they're like, well, yeah, we need a paid account. It's like, wow, is that not something that we could have chatted about before production was down? Would that have been cool?
Completely. I think that's about summarizing what the API economy is. I mean, you got tons of APIs. You're good to go. Just connect. Don't worry about it. I mean, we'll meet later on in production and we'll see how things are doing. But this is the essence of the API economy out there.
But that's an interesting perspective, really. I'm not sure how much I've seen that. But it really makes me think of that meme of Chappelle with the meth, where it's like, it was Coke. I think it was Coke. It was like, you got any more of the, free tier, really missing out there.
For sure. Well, we're going to dig into that a lot more. But first, give us a little bit about your background and what led you to co-founding Lunar.dev. What decisions did you make in life that made you think that this is where you needed to be?
Wow, that's a big question. This is me procrastinating on all of my biggest decisions so far. Right. That's a heavy one. But no, so I'm Eyal. I'm the co-founder of Lunar.dev. I've founded Lunar with my close friend for the past 30 years, which is Roy. He's the CTO of the company. We've been around since first grade. Actually, the both of us are engineers and cybersecurity engineers in particular. This is our background, low-level understanding of things, which is not exactly what Lunar does, but taking that mindset of cybersecurity and understanding the tool set that we got, we thought that there's a lot of problems to solve when it comes to optimizing. At the beginning, you're thinking that, naturally, you're shifting towards optimizing infrastructure. The infrastructure that you run upon, the cloud infrastructure, there's some cool startups in that direction. But I think that the signals that we picked up along the way is that, listen, infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, that's cool. But me as a heavy consumer of third-party APIs, this is what bugs me at the end of the day. This is what I'm trying to optimize on a monthly basis. This is where my billing skyrockets. And hearing that sound and talking with other companies, I think that along the way we've connected the dots and understand that, like the natural progression is that if companies move from on-prem to the cloud, and then they consume it in abundance, all that resource, and that resource needs to be managed and optimized. This is stage one. But as companies progress to be much more consumers of APIs, like the SaaS perspective of things, that calls for another management and optimization layer on top of it. So it kind of like led us like over a month to the understanding. It wasn't like a one aha moment that like sparked our minds, but it was talking with different companies, understanding that even though they're thinking that it's a different problem for each and one of them, it all boils down to the same problems, to the same type of middleware solutions. And then like I think the inception of Lunar came to be that, okay, we can be that platform that can build that management and active controls on top of your egress traffic, the third-party APIs you're consuming. So that's like the story in a nutshell. Obviously, we've done API integrations. We've been optimizing them on our own previously. But when we did it back then, we didn't connect the dots. Only when talking with a lot of companies, we understood that, okay, there's like a common denominator among all of those companies.
Yeah, for sure. So like from my perspective, there's this array of APIs that your application consumes. Each one of those has a separate billing agreement, a separate tier. There's API keys that have to be managed for that. There's rate limiting. Each one, may have different ways of showing that you're being rate limited or how they return errors. We won't even go down the path of the APIs that return an HTTP 200 with a JSON blob that says error inside of it to let you know that there's an error. But like those are all of the different things that you have to deal with when consuming the APIs for your application. And so it can be a lot of work. Like that's all work that is necessary for your application, but it's not really considered as part of building an application. I think a lot of us don't think about that. We think about, we got to write our functions. We got to build our Docker images. We got to build the UI, and where should we put the button on the screen, and we tend to overlook that until we have a production outage because of one of these API issues.
He's really got some like past drama here.
Right. We can just build this. We can bill this episode to my insurance company as therapy.
I mean, what really, like, even the 200 with the error code in the body, like I'll take that over an API which does something either monetary related, physical related, or timeliness related, and doesn't offer item potency.
Yeah.
It's just, and there are those that are out there, and it's sort of ridiculous. Can you go and talk to these companies and make them, offer item potency, automatic retries that don't double bill, or don't send messages or emails to a user twice? Because I'd really like that.
So you would imagine, right? I mean, if we can only talk with the entire API economy out there and and make sure that they're aligned in the same way so that companies will consume them better, which is one option that you can do. But the other option is saying, listen, this is a consumption problem. So let's put focus on the consumer and not the provider. Let's give active controls to the consumer and make that unified consumption layer or mediation layer on top of it. I think, Will, you said it correctly. I mean, most of the focus so far when it comes to third-party APIs is around integrating with an API. You got tons of them. Either you're doing natively or you're doing with an iPaaS, or you're doing with a marketplace. You got a lot of those solutions in place. They've been around for years, but there's not that much focus, if any, on the post-integration side. Post-integration is what happens when it's already running in production. Now, there's a difference between when you integrate it with that API, and now you're running production. Because in production, first of all, scale, obviously, like immense scale that you couldn't test in staging. Things tends to break over time because scale will get bigger over time. outages and the actual way that the API provider is behaving, breaking changes, stuff like that. So that's something that you maybe didn't encounter during development stage, but in production, it's bound to happen. And I think there's less visibility and real-time monitoring on the way that those APIs are interacting. You're interacting with those APIs. So there's a lot of unknowns and not a lot of focus on what it comes to do with managing those APIs in production. And this is where things begin to break. Companies begin to, as you both described it, I mean, along the way, when it breaks, you hear about it. And then obviously it takes time to understand, does it something that has to do on the provider side or on my backend? So a lot of investigation over time, troubleshooting. It is a problem, and it's a problem that companies are bearing with them along the way. And solving it mostly on their own, trying to build those things on their own as they progress and as they grow. So definitely a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it, though, because even with the iPaaS solutions or embedded iPaaS with the integrations, it's sort of this area where you see it as a blocker to start your project or start the integration to get the business value out. But it just, like security, I feel like it's one of those things where you can ignore it up front and not think about it. And then later it's going to immediately bite you and take down your whole platform because the quote unquote project you started in your company to integrate with whatever that third party provider is over. Maybe the team is gone. And so if you didn't start with the thought in mind of how are we going to make sure that this integration is successful over time, you're likely not in a very good spot where you can just do a little extra work and get the value out. You likely need a real tool to make the difference.
Completely agree with you. And I'll also refer to what you're saying in a term of resilience and availability. If you didn't thought in advance of, okay, something is bound to happen with that third-party API, and you didn't thought of those retries in place, those circuit breakers, those fallback functions. So if one API goes down, you'll switch to the alternative. If you haven't thought about that, and by the way, most companies don't think about it until they encounter those things over time, then definitely, I mean, things will be impacted. And the thing is that now, these days, third-party APIs, SLA, has a direct impact on your product's SLA. I mean, as we said, if their goes down, if they're malfunctioning, so does your product. So that's the mindset that we're trying to advocate to change. I mean, you need to think about your integrations, not in day one, but like in day 100, when things will begin to scale and break, and what type of resilience have you put in place? That's the mindset that it's like being active with your API integrations and with your maintenance over time.
Yeah, and so one approach to this is you can do that yourself. You can build in the monitoring, the alerting, and hope that you have the right error handling in place, and do that for each API that your application's consuming. But I'm assuming that if I use something like Lunar.dev, that I get a lot of that stuff for free just by using your platform, right?
Right. I mean, worth maybe saying in a sentence about what we do and who we are. We're an API consumption management platform. We're giving that tool or that platform for engineering teams to monitor, manage, and actively optimize their outgoing traffic. The way that the product works is basically by two components. So you got, first of all, the main thing, which is the egress gateway. This is where all of the API calls will run through, or selectively the API calls that you want to manage. And you got the component that will tunnel that traffic through the gateway. Instead of going to the actual provider, it will be tunneled or rerouted via that gateway. There's various methods to do so. You can do it with an SDK, intercept the traffic for encryption. You can do with the company, changing the URL. So it will be pointed to the gateway and at the header on top of it. So there's like multiple ways of routing the traffic. But the main thing is that once the traffic is being routed to the egress gateway, this is where you're seeing, first of all, as you mentioned, visibility for the first time in real time. But what's important with visibility, it's not just, okay, those are my API calls. It's the actual performance understanding of how those APIs are interacting. Like, what's their error rate? What's the latency? What's the duration that it takes for an API call to make it and make it back to your system? All of those things and much more, those are the type of visibility that is lacking, and you need that visibility to have all of those controls that we talked about. I mean, resilience and keep track in terms of security. How much are you enforcing security over your API interactions, stuff like that. So the egress gateway is there to provide you with visibility. But then on top of it, because the egress gateway has actual controls over on request and on response, you can have actual controls to modify the traffic, to change it, to shift it, to orchestrate that traffic. And now you can enforce egress policies, such as caching API calls to third-party APIs. For example, if you want to reduce some costs and avoid those redundant API calls, or maybe improve latency, same aspect. Or you want to define your own type of throttling mechanism, like the way that you pacing, the way that you're making outgoing calls, or queuing API calls by priority. All of those things, which we can name as API middleware, those are the things that once you're tunneling traffic via that gateway, you can have active controls upon. So you can have better resilience, as we talked about, you can reduce some cost, and you can have a better security and efficiency to the way that you're interacting with those APIs without changing your existing infrastructure and your existing code.
There's something about this that I really like, because I feel like we've integrated with lots of platforms as a company and over my career. And something I keep getting back from support requests are, hey, can you send us your logs regarding that? And I'm like, our logs for calling your service, like, that thing that you're supposed to have. Oh yeah, we prune it after like 2-3 days or 7 days. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, but like, I'm not logging what's going on your side. Like, I don't have that ridiculous data. As a matter of fact, if anything, that's exactly the sort of thing that we're dropping intentionally, unless there's a problem, because I don't want to record unnecessary duplicate data like that. So there's a really interesting aspect here where you don't want it to be a first-class application notion to have to care about storing these requests and responses from a third party in a way. Either it's application data, in which case you're storing in a different way in your database, or it's third-party data, in which, like, don't you have that already that you can, use to validate whatever I'm talking about? So there is something huge here for support requests. And I'm wondering whether or not there's like a common offender that you find that like all your customers like, we use Lunar.dev always with this platform or this platform. Like, there's a lot of mileage out of it. Any thoughts about that?
So I think that in terms of platform, I think that like the majority of our customers are interacting directly with the API provider. Because once again, we can think about, at least that's the pattern that we saw up until now. When it's a business critical API, you want to have that direct connection. You don't want to be reliant on a third party that will tell you, listen, something has been broken with your API. So they have direct linkage with those API providers. I will say that the vast majority of the companies, I'll shift the question a bit. The majority of them always want to start with visibility. First of all, let me understand what is happening out there. If there's a sprawl, if there's give me discovery, give me cataloging, give me an understanding in real time what is happening. Past that phase, you'll be open to the understanding or the idea that those iterations might have problems, and how can you remediate them? But I think that if there's a common ground among all the companies that we've seen is, first of all, let me for the first time understand how my API calls are behaving, how that third party is interacting, so I can decide later on I want to shift and change and orchestrate the traffic so it can fit my business logic. Hope that answered the question, because I shifted it just a bit.
Yeah, I think visibility just can't be overstated enough, because that's huge, because that's the basis of your cost for APIs. It's consumption-based pricing, and it's just critical to understand how often you're using these APIs And it's really hard to do because if you have to implement it yourself, client side, for every single API that you consume, that's so much added work. And if you try to get it from the API provider, a lot of my experience with that has been that it's challenging to get. You're getting like 429 throttled, and so you log into their platform to see what's going on, and they're like, yeah, you're getting throttled. I'm like, well, how much? How many requests are we making? How long has this been going on? And that type of visibility is not there.
And you've actually, I think, stated not the worst use case, because those are API providers that will give you some kind of an answer, an understanding, a dashboard to what is happening. You'd be surprised or not surprised how many APIs, how many APIs are not third-party APIs, meaning that the core offering of that company is not its API. It's just something on the side, something that it has to do. Those are, I've talked with someone just recently, and he said, I'm going to classify the world of APIs into two sections. There's the APIs that you want to use, and the APIs that you forced or must use. And those forced or must use, those are poorly documented legacy APIs. I'm going to say like a bad word, SOAP-based APIs in some cases. And those are APIs that it's hard to manage. It's hard to understand like what is happening in real time. And as you mentioned, it's an ongoing problem. And even if you did have a clear view among all of the API providers, like how much am I consuming in real time, when I'm going to hit those 429s, think about the sheer amount of APIs that need to check each and every dashboard to get that understanding. It kind of goes to show that you need to have active controls. You need to have that visibility from your side, keeping track of it, understanding like based on the tier that you've purchased, what is your usage over time, when you're going to be bound by those 429s. And as we said, take active controls upon that data. So if you know that like you're being bounded to hit those 429s like a week from now, or maybe like a few minutes from now, then you want to change the pace or the order of outgoing API calls so you can prioritize your VIP customers first, make those API calls first instead of the freemium customers, for example. So visibility can go up to a certain degree from the provider side, and the vast majority of them are not giving you that full visibility. But then the controls of what happens and the actions that need to be taken upon that visibility, this is on you. This is the company. This is the consumer of the API. And yeah, this is like it is a thing. It is a thing, and it varies across industries. You would imagine that maybe it's like just a subset of APIs. No. Trading industry, travel tech industry, even like the companies that consume APIs on behalf of their customers. Think of all of the security posture management type of companies that they will do some kind of a scanning and posture management. Those are like, once again, another problem that is being opened up. Everyone has its own type of sickness and problems when it comes to consuming APIs, and everyone has been building their own type of mechanisms to deal with them and to gain that type of visibility so that they can act accordingly.
For sure. I think the scale of this problem just gets more and more. I heard a comment recently, and it's not 100% true, but I think it resonates with some truth, that we're not software engineers anymore. We just bolt different APIs together to get a different result.
Someone told me that we're the sum of all of the APIs we're consuming. That's like being philosophical over here.
That's great. I like that.
Yeah.
So in terms of working with Lunar, what does it look like to use Lunar to solve this problem? Like, do all of your, when you integrate with Lunar, do all of your API calls go to Lunar and then you relay them through there? Or how does that work?
Yeah. So first of all, Lunar is a self-hosted solution. We perceive ourselves as a mediation layer. So we're an infrastructure component Companies are installing Lunar on their own, managing it via the control plane. The control plane is a SaaS one, but the infrastructure itself, the egress and the routers of the traffic, those are self-hosted. Phase one of the product is saying, okay, once you install the egress gateway, then you choose which APIs you want to tunnel. You can either choose to tunnel everything, or from specific applications, or just a subset of it. Once it's being tunneled, the first thing that you're getting is that discovery and that cataloging. That catalog is going to be filled up in real time based on the actual API calls that are making. Like the system can detect what type of API calls are being set outside based on the domain, the way the domain looks like, and then once those API are being discovered, then you're getting that, first of all, visibility. You can either see it from the control plane that Lunar offers or from your Datadog and whatever API you're using. And on top of it, what we're doing, this is like the next phase, is on top of getting that visibility in real time, we're saying, listen, we're detecting problems over here. We're seeing that, you're surpassed a specific threshold of 429s, for example, and then the active part of the system kicks in, because now we can offer you policies, we call them flows, remediation flows, that can have active controls based on that problem. If you're seeing a 429 and you want to pace the outgoing traffic in a way that you can define a rate limit policy. It can be concurrency based, it can be strategy based, where you are holding a specific pace in mind. So it can be also caching some of those API calls. So every middleware that you can think of, we're implementing as we go into the system, so that you're encountering a problem, the system will detect it over time and then can suggest you with a solution. A solution is just enforcing that policy on top of the gateway instead of actually writing it these days in code within your application. That's the way that the system works, and people are onboarding additional APIs once they're gaining that trust with the system, and then seeing additional problems with it, enforcing them. Eventually, what we're seeing ourselves is that missing infrastructure layer to much needed, I think, cloud native companies. They're making API calls. They need something to manage and orchestrate that traffic. And this is basically Lunar.
Right on. I like the fact that it's self-hosted.
Yeah. I think that it's something that we grew upon. It grew on us. Meaning that maybe it was an easier decision to start SaaS, but we understood that in terms of we don't want to deal with the cost of the outgoing API calls if it was a SaaS solution. We don't want to have some kind of a risk in terms of PII being leaked outside, like actual API calls of companies. And we want to have as low latency as possible, obviously. This calls for a self-hosted solution, and this is like where the system and the product shifted towards.
Right on.
We had a similar discussion actually internally for our product, but since we're not a proxy to requests, it's a sort of a second request that just goes somewhere else. And so in that regard, it's not a concern for us being a SaaS, but given that a model is having the request go through the gateway, you would need realistically the gateways as close to your customers, between your customers and their users, everywhere those users are, which is even more a ridiculous problem than what we realistically have. And I can definitely see that. I have to ask, it's not like you're hijacking TLS certs to proxy the traffic. You have like some sort of HTTP SDK that you use instead of whatever the default REST or HTTP client or SOAP client is that the actual application is using, I'm guessing.
That's right. If it's an SDK, we're intercepting the traffic as HTTP just before it's being encrypted, telling that traffic, and then the MTLS will take place from the gateway to the third-party API.
Good call out, Warren. It's man in the middle as a service.
Well, it's funny what you're talking about, because almost 10 years ago, I feel like we were in this spot where all the problems you're talking about were exactly the things that we were dealing with. And it wasn't about production. It was like we're calling out from our service to another service internally in our company, managed by a different team, and they can't handle the load that we need to support our customers. And so we added in a middleware in C# as it was to basically buffer the requests going out to make sure we didn't hose them by sort of rate limiting ourselves and try to do some traffic shaping there. And like that was one of the things we did because they couldn't be trusted to handle real requests, which is just absolutely so ridiculous. And we open sourced that, and like other teams started using it in the company, which is like the opposite of what you think when you want to deal with requests coming in and you're like, oh, well, we want to rate limit them. We were like self-rate limiting. And that wasn't the only time. Like there were a couple other situations. The biggest one is, I don't know how much I want to bring this up, but like one of our competitors in the auth space, they charge for individual client JWT token generation. And lots of times the application you have on your side of the service or microservice or whatever doesn't have a good idea of how to cache, right? There's a lot of concurrency and separate containers being spun up, especially functions as a service. And so internally, there was a team at our company who wrote a proxy to our now competitor to cache these requests and just return an outdated token if it was still valid. And I'm just like, if you're running into these situations, you really have a couple of options here. Number one is, please pick a different provider. Like, right. There's multiple third-party providers. Some of them don't charge you for that ridiculous notion, while other of them are. And obviously, the second option is, go build you something yourself to prevent making these calls. And the third one is, I guess, now just use Lunar.dev. That's an obvious answer.
Thank you, Warren, first of all. But I'm with you on that. I mean, first of all, what you're saying is really interesting. I think the bigger companies that we've spoken with, that problem that Lunar is positioning itself, like active controls the third-party API consumption. This is an internal problem because they're serving so many inner API calls that their services are being like they have their own domains. They're like a third-party API to the organization. So that's like a thing. And I think that pattern, as we just talked about it, this is like a common pattern. I mean, it's not rocket science in a way, but the pattern is that companies have been building it on their own. Now, we can discuss whether it makes sense to build it on their own, but I think that the main argument that I'm going to make is that why would you build it on your own? Yeah, you can build that type of gateway on your own. It's take a proxy, choose whatever you want. I mean, choose Nginx, choose AJ proxy. You can build it. Question is why though? I mean, why building something to maintain third-party API integrations where your core purpose is innovating and like bring new value to the actual product that you're building, so that maintenance over time, it's something that it's like seamless to the eye. But over time, you're seeing that you're dedicating much more task force to manage that infrastructure, to make sure that it's scalable, that it's not a single point of failure. I mean, it becomes another thing another animal on its own within your infrastructure. So we're saying in that build versus buy dilemma, you should really take into consideration how much time it will take you to build it and maintain it, and whether you need to do it as part of your core purpose. Like our claim is that you don't have to now, and so you can you can work with us and pay as you go, stuff like that. So I think that we're trying to shift the paradigm of you don't need to build it on your own anymore.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really comes to mind is that with larger companies, their products with well-oiled APIs, and there's very few of them out there that I'm like, oh, that's a good API. I think one that comes to mind often is Stripe. You probably maybe don't need a solution like this. But there's so many companies out there that are making APIs where it's not their core competency, and they're not good. And if they offer, I can't believe I'm saying this, some companies don't offer multiple API keys to interact with their APIs. And so if you have multiple, like if you have a company, a product that interacts with one of the chat services, they have an API, and you only get one API key per chat bot. And so what would you do if you had multiple teams in your company that both needed to access that chatbot, utilize services, because you have maybe 2 pizza teams and microservices. And so it's not even a matter of building the competency yourself. It's really like, are you going to build this chatbot application proxy just to communicate with that thing, and like what would go into that even. And so it's not like you just build something yourself. It's like you really need a core thing here in order for it to work. And well, there's an open source solution to just go and cross that chasm right away without having to. I mean, you're not going to build this into your service. There's no way you can split an API key into two services. Like that's not even an option, right? You're going to build a proxy of some sort.
I like that. I mean, this is a truly interesting thing that we actually seen, and because we've heard it from customers who developed it, and I'll explain. This is a problem where you have multiple consumers consuming the same API key. Now, all of those consumers are sharing the same quota.
Yeah.
It's so until you've hit that problem, if you want a rate limit based on a single key, I mean, you can do it rather easily with code in your application. Once you need to distribute the quota among different consumers, you gotta have something in place which is like that single port, which is a proxy or a gateway. Now, what we've done in that perspective is saying, listen, if we're in possession of that API key, then we can generate subkeys or ephemeral keys. Those subkeys can be better fine-grained control, meaning that you can have a subset of the quota being assigned to every key. So first of all, you can have granular controls over that subkey. So now production and staging will consume 20% based on your logic, for example. But the thing that you're getting on top of it is also a security enhancement, because now no longer will the developers will have or the threat of having the actual key in plain sight. You will have always that generated subkey that will be translated within the gateway to the actual key and make those API calls. So all of those mechanisms in place will have to take place with a proxy in the middle. And it's a known issue. I mean, as you said, this is like chatbot is one option, but we've heard it all across the board. So this is one of the interesting patterns that we saw along the way with API consumption problems. Yeah. It varies across industries, by the way, varies across company sizes. It's one of those interesting takes. And then adding on top of it, think that maybe you want to regulate the traffic based on a queue base. So staging will be prioritized more in production than staging. So you want to pace that traffic. You can do all those type of middleware manipulations once you got that proxy in place or that gateway in place.
I'm smirking a little bit because you said, there's no other way around this. And I'll tell you one, because I've seen it in practice, where all the services log their own usage and then export it to a third-party system where they try to aggregate the usage back up to understand what's actually happening after the fact. And it just seems so nonsensical to try to log this data within the service, because it was bad enough before where you were sharing something, but now you're adding a lot of complexity to your logging and observability system, just so that you can pull out this non-application related metric that really has nothing to do with the application at all.
And I'll give you another actual method. We've heard this is like a company, IPO'd company, a big one. Same problem, one key, two consumers. They're sharing that data via mail. So they're establishing like a protocol within mail of saying, listen, you will not surpass that threshold, and I will and if we'll have some kind of spillover, that will relay to you with another email message saying, listen, I've got some of that quota left, so you can use it. This is the way that it works these days. I mean, not these days. It works where companies are not having that infrastructure mindset. It should be an architecture. I mean, this is what we're trying to advocate out there. So yeah, it can go rogue and worse pretty fast.
I like the idea of issuing subkeys. That's pretty cool, because it is very. I don't know if the common is the right word, but it's not unusual to see where you need to connect to the production grade API service to get the quality of data that you need, and so then you have a scenario where you have a dev application that they load test it, blew out your quota, and now prod's dead for that.
If I had a nickel, and I had a few nickels, right? I don't want to over exaggerate, but yeah, completely agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of ridiculous that these things exist, though. Like, I would really like, okay, don't have to think about that. Prod and non-prod have different keys for different universes, and there's no way that you could have a problem there, and you would never need to share keys between different consumers because each consumer has their own key, which has their own individual permissions there. Like, that seems so table stakes to me, but I think I'm heavily influenced here because we offer like API keys as a service within our own product, and I know not everyone's using it. Like, I wish I could say, oh yeah, everyone in the world using our product. So they have API keys as a service, out of the box, but they're not. Like, and these APIs, like, they're made, as you said, every industry has some technology, which there's somewhere along the technology adoption curve for really API understanding, like lacks documentation or not even using JSON or binary format, like compressed binary format to communicate, but they're using XML or SOAP or something else more ridiculous. Which is really unfortunate. I want to go back to under the rock that I, maybe live under, where it's a little bit nicer, where people aren't doing this.
Yeah.
So Warren, you brought up the chatbot idea, and it made me think of the show prep notes that we had prior to the show. And in there, Eyal, you've got AI-driven APIs. So can you elaborate on that phrase? Because I'm super curious to learn more about that.
Yeah. So first of all, I was looking at the counter of the recordings that we started, and it's minute 41 since we brought up AI for the first time, which is like kudos for us, which is cool. Yeah, I think that maybe like the way that I want to approach that topic is not necessarily AI APIs, but the coupling that is now taking place and will take place with companies trying to embed some kind of an AI offering to them. So obviously, like the vast majority of them will integrate with AI APIs. I mean, you got a bunch of them these days competing over cost and accuracy. And the thing is that we can look at AI APIs like OpenAI and Gemini and whatnot as a subset of the problem that we've been talking about for the past 40 minutes, which is like API consumption problems. But if we were to like dive a bit deeper, then we'll understand that even though there are another set of APIs, there's like something pretty unique to them. It's either the tokens, that it's the currency that you're using. So every API call being made with a prompt can be boiled down to a number of tokens, which will correlate with cost. And this is a problem on its own. I mean, how do you keep track of over the tokens being consumed? How do you have active controls and regulation on API calls based on the number of tokens that you consumed and used? So this is like one aspect of it. And second aspect of it is security, which is like we're just, I think, scratching the surface. I mean, how do you make sure that you're not abusing that AI capabilities to extract something that you weren't meant to extract? If it's a malicious actor, how do you make sure that you're not like sending over those API calls sensitive data that you weren't supposed to send? Those are like things that begins to be pretty unique with AI APIs that companies need to think upon. And I said that the last thing, or maybe like the third thing, is cost, because those are costly APIs. I mean, you have to have active controls and predictions on how much will it cost you to consume those APIs. And then you need to do like the second phase, which is, okay, if that's a costly API, do I actually need to make that API call to ChatGPT, like to GPT-4, or maybe I can have it to maybe like a less expensive API, maybe like a open source type of API, maybe like Hugging Face or stuff like that. So a lot of consideration that needs to take place, which is pretty unique to AI, and you need to regulate that traffic as you need to regulate it with other APIs out there. And I think that this is like the next phase of AI and APIs and the problems that are associated with them, and will only grow over time.
I think you're underselling it here actually a little bit. If I think about it just a little bit longer, you actually have the capability of altering a hypothetical system prompt to restrict the responses back from AI-enabled APIs, like, hey, prefix whatever the prompt is that's being sent with, and your response should be less than 100 characters or 100 tokens long. And then you're sort of guaranteeing that extra security in there, which is something which isn't really necessary with non-AI enabled ones, where they don't usually count per tokens. It's usually, maybe it's by data out, which isn't so common, but for sure way more common in the AI space.
Completely agreeing with you. Yeah, and you can also talk about hallucinations and stuff that really like sicknesses of AI APIs on their own, and how you want to deal with it from the application level. I mean, from the API calls perspective. So that's like just the beginning of things. All we know that if you had an infrastructure that will give you controls over requests and responses, and can see that full visibility, including the payload, which within the payload, before it's been encrypted, you can see the actual prompt and everything. Yeah. Then you can have smart decision that can take place from a security standpoint of view, from caching standpoint of view, usage-based patterns stuff. So yeah, that's like another aspect to it.
Yeah, that's crazy, because when using an AI type service like that, the scope of what you could send that is just limitless. And since there's direct costs associated with that, that's a whole new budgeting paradigm of evaluating, is this the right use of this API, or should we be doing something different there?
Exactly. There's an ongoing debate whether over time you will need to shift between AI APIs, let's say Gemini and OpenAI and Mistral, because of accuracy and cost. And based on your business logic, you will decide for those API calls, I want to have them via OpenAI because it will be less expensive or maybe more accurate, or the other alternative. This is like one aspect that maybe will unfold over time. But the other claim is that actually those AI APIs will converge, and the big players out there will kind of even out in terms of accuracy and cost. And then the only play that you have to play is with the niche AI APIs. Those that has been trained on a specific model. They will give you that fine-grained offering to it. As I said, like, it's still the early days. We're none of us know at that point of time what will be the way that companies will consume AI APIs at scale. All we know is that they will consume it at scale. They will have to regulate the traffic, have proper controls, see the prompt, take action accordingly, have visibility. So there's like a lot of things to be unfolded, I think, over time. And I'll spark another thing here is that up until now, we've been talking about direct consumption of AI. I mean, you're making some kind of a call, and that has been streamed as an API call to OpenAI, for example. But the next phase that people were talking about and just starting to unravel is those AI agents, which means that an agent will be able to make other API calls based on his integrations with other systems that you have within the organization, so that AI agent will propagate a lot of API calls from other API integrations. Think about the sheer amount of API traffic that will be sent via that uncontrolled AI agent, that component that is not even like a human. This is like something that is embedded within your product. And now it's making all of those API calls, connecting so many places, making those. How do you keep track on all of that? So this is like another, I think, challenge on its own that will unfold over time.
I mean, I think part of the struggle here is the value maybe not so clear, and so by the companies offering AIs as a service or APIs that give access to an AI as a service, because otherwise they probably would charge by value and not by tokens. And then I think we'll get to a better state. But we've already gotten to the point where niches have popped up things like sentiment analysis or image generation, or so like there are already this case where a single prompt may focus going into a different direction based off of whatever the sort of data that we're looking for. So I think both of your hypotheses are, it's not a duality. Both of them are true. We'll get niches of AIs of having to select the appropriate model at the right time, depending on the type of data that you're looking for. But we're already at the point, I think, of the other fact as well, where individual companies are being more commoditized. Like you're like, oh, I don't care if I use Gemini or OpenAI or Anthropic's Claude model. Like they're all like, yeah, one's better than another, maybe. I think those companies that have the most money, though, will be the ones that go forth and just do the AWS Bedrock thing, which is we're just going to call all the models from every company at once and use it to compare the results, because it offers a couple different strategies, actually. The first one is that the result is sort of higher probability to be right. The second one is that if one of the models has a security vulnerability, the other ones will actually refuse to return the same answer. So you'll know that there's a problem with the request, the prompt that's gone out there. So if you're just passing along the caller's data entry, but I think positioning yourself in this spot here does have a huge sort of untapped security aspect that I imagine today people may not even really be thinking about, but they should be.
Yeah. And interesting perspective what you said out there. Pretty cool. I mean, I'm assuming that not all companies will have that ability to just make API calls to every API provider out there, but that's interesting. This is also a way to I think to battle with hallucination in a way. I mean, take the answer of one model and then run the same thing on top of the other model and compare between them.
I mean, if you're interested about this topic, there's a great GitHub repository that was created by Remy McCarthy and Clint Gibler of TLDR, where they went through like 50 different AI-related papers, recent ones, about how to deal with problems with AI models. And a real strategy is take the output from the model and pass it out to the input of another model and say, hey, like regenerate the prompt and do this cycle, or split the prompt into two pieces and run it against different models and then combine the result. And you do multiple of these things over and over again, and it sort of eliminates the possibility of a malicious actor. So like, if this is an interesting topic, like there's so many of these that are like, wow, you could really be doing a lot of interesting things in this space.
That's really cool. Yeah, it is truly interesting.
That's going deep down the rabbit hole.
If you go deep down there, there's this article that came out that said that still no companies are making money from AI in any way, shape, or form, other than, I guess, NVIDIA, right, for selling the shovels.
Yes. I think that every time that I'm speaking about like AI APIs, the future of it, eventually it will sound like a Rick and Morty episode along the way. And that point I'm saying like, okay, I gotta unfold. Like I gotta go back.
I mean, it makes you think. There was that one episode where it was like the story within the story with the train dude, and the end of it was like a heist, and he's like, "That's what I wanted you to think. That's what I wanted you to think," and they were like just stuck in an infinite cycle here. That's for sure where we're going.
Exactly.
Unsubscribe. I'm one off. So I want to shift topics here real quick. Let's talk about running.
Let's talk about running. All right, let's do it.
Yeah. So I take you're a runner.
I am not a pro one, but it's something I've been doing for since adolescence.
Right on. Like long distance, you have a specialty, favorite thing to do?
So I think I try to keep it casual. I've been running like as much as I can, like 2 to 3 times a week. And usually, so I'm going to go with the metric system. I can't relate it to miles, but it's like,
fair enough.
Apologies in advance to all of our audience.
Don't apologize.
But it's like between 10 to 15K. So yeah, this is like a way to clean your mind and fine tune yourself and just like, relieve stress. Something I've been doing for a lot of time. It's like my own type of meditation.
Yeah. I'm glad you went there, because I did an experiment last year with running, and that was one of the big unexpected learnings I had, is that running really is meditation. And when I first started running, I had music going and stuff, and then over time I just ditched everything, because for two reasons. One, because long distance running was such a meditative experience that whenever you got done, it was like, wow, I feel so much better despite being physically tired. But the other thing I learned was, like, there's actually a lot to keep track of while you're running. You're focused on what's my run cadence look like? Where am I landing on my feet? Is my stride right? What's my respiratory rate? And there's so many things that you need to focus on to do this effectively, that if you have music playing as a distraction, then your running quality suffers from it, as well as you don't get that great meditative experience out of it.
See,
I agree.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I used to do this, and I had the errant thoughts, like, that would be like, oh no, like, there's this bug in production somewhere that I would I wrote code that is a problem, or I just thought of this thing that I have to I have to write it down. Like, I'd just be like, an hour later I'd be like, okay, what was that thing that I figured out while I was meditating, while running, and it was like a huge problem, and I never really got over that.
So I think that if you were to multiply the duration of your run, it was you will go past that. What was I thinking about? And it's like, it doesn't matter. I mean, everything is ephemeral in life. I mean,
right.
It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's okay.
He reaches nirvana by running.
Exactly. Yeah. So I know, like, I think that's the right time to surface it, that you're saying that, like, usually in your episodes, the person that is being interviewed has some kind of a recommendation to make. And I thought about what I want to recommend, and that's this book that I've read a few years ago. One of my favorites. It's called Born to Run, right?
Okay.
And it talks. Have you heard about this one?
I've read this one. It is such a great book.
I love it. You heard about it, Robin?
No, actually.
So there's this dude. It's like an actual story. It's not something fictional. It's fictional. It's not science fiction. He had his pain by running. He gave up on that. He's a journalist, and then he heard about this tribe in Mexico, in rural Mexico, that they're running the long distance miles. I mean, as a way of living. They don't have cars. They're just running for a living. And he goes out to this tribe, and he discovers that they're the ultimate ultra-marathon runners. I mean, they can run for miles over miles without getting tired. They actually can beat the vast majority of the pro ultra-marathon runners. And then as he investigated over time, he understand that people are actually born to run. I mean, one of the old methods of hunting, and he found a tribe that actually still doing it in Africa. They're running until they're until the cattle or the target is being exhausted, because humans, as opposed to other most of the mammals, can really have endurance over time because they have sweat, so they can ventilate everything. Most animals will have to breathe to do so, and it's breathe per gallop because they're four-legged animals, so they can outpace you at any time, but eventually 50k of running, they will crash down, being exhausted, and this is where you're going to stick your spear and take me back home. So kind of saying that at the gist of things, people are born to run. We're long distance runners in our anatomy, and we just forgot about it along the over the course of years.
Yeah, I really like that format of book, because the author, I can't remember the author's name, but the way they broke the book up was it's an entertaining story in itself, but then they would break up the sections of the story and go into the science of why that part of the story was true, or how that part of the story works. And so the book would switch back and forth between, here's like an entertaining section of the story. Here's the science behind that. Here's the next part of the story. Here's the science behind that. And so it was both entertaining and educational at the same time. And it just a fascinating read.
Completely agree with you. By the way, this is the book that sparked the barefoot running trend.
Right. So do you run barefoot?
No way. I'm not proud of the trend. I'm just like talking about the trend, but I'm giving my Nikes and I'm good to go. No, it's too painful to try to adapt to barefoot running.
For sure. Agreed. No, that was a cool book. If even if you're not interested in running, it's just a really cool story because it talks about humans historically and how we survived up until this point. And then there's just the educational takeaways as well. Cool pick.
Thank you.
Warren, what'd you bring for a pick this week?
My pick is I didn't have something relevant, so it's going to be definitely separate. It's a book again because I go through my whole book list, and it's Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it's a book about negotiation, and I don't think that's accurate. I really like it as a mindset shift for when you think there are only two competing outcomes for a situation. I like the salary negotiation as an example. It's like if you say, oh, this, I want this much money, and someone else says, no, we can only pay you that much. It's sort of not a smart way to approach the conversation. Instead, you want to attach every extra dollar, for instance, in a salary negotiation to something concrete, like I'm worth this much more because of my experience. This many number of years of experience is worth this much, this many more years is worth that much. And then you're sort of agreeing or disagreeing about the relationship between something concrete and the money in a salary negotiation, rather than arbitrary, like, oh, let's just throw out arbitrary numbers. But I think that's really important because it's really gotten me to shift my focus when I feel like I may be in a negotiation situation about what we're actually talking about and where my value is personally, or where the value of doing something is, especially like evaluating software products comes up a lot. It can be very difficult to evaluate, which ones we want to use, which ones are good. And if people just get into a conversation of like, oh, this one's better, do this and not do that, it doesn't really come out that well. But if you're able to evaluate, okay, we will do that if this, or if we need that, it really has this extra mindset. And I think this book really helped me get there.
And that's another one of those books where Chris Voss, the author, his background, he was a former FBI hostage negotiator. Yeah. And so the book format is very similar to Born to Run, where he'll tell you this cool story about this hostage negotiation scenario he was in. And then he breaks down the specific technical components of negotiation that he used in that scenario. So it's that two-part thing, where here's a really entertaining story. Here's the educational component. Here's another entertaining story. Here's the educational component. Just that format is so cool to me.
I bet you really like The Martian.
I don't think I've read that.
Oh, no.
Likewise. Seen the movie, though.
Oh, okay. So there is this cult favorite story out there that's been out there for so long. So Andy Weir is the author, and it's called the Egg, I think. And it's like a philosophy on like what life is. And it's so old. And then I read The Martian, and I'm like, this is great. And then I found out that I had actually read The Egg, which is it's like translated into like 30 languages by people. It's a very short story. But it definitely goes into like, it's very science based, but there's some story. And then the main character is telling about the science of why they're able to do what they're doing. And so in The Martian, he's stuck on Mars and he's in a precarious situation. And there's a second there where it's like, oh, I need to grow potatoes. It's like, okay, let me tell you about the science of growing potatoes. And then
I did read this book. Yeah. I did read it. Yeah, I didn't recognize the name because that was the movie with Mark Wahlberg, right?
No, Matt Damon, I think.
Oh, Matt Damon.
What's
Marky
the difference, right?
Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, or whatever his name really is.
Yeah,
The Funky
Damon,
Bunch,
yeah, for sure. So I think it's really well done from that regard. Yeah, but my pick officially is going to be Never Split the Difference.
Yeah, cool. Both of those are great books, though. Yeah, super cool. All right, so my pick, I'm going with a video/music pick this week because the YouTube algorithm has figured out that I can't resist watching reaction videos to musical performances. And there's a YouTuber called The Charismatic Voice, and the specific video I've watched a couple of them. The one that I most recently watched was her reaction to the Iron Maiden song, The Trooper. And so she's a classically trained vocalist, and she's watching this heavy metal video. You know, Iron Maiden is straight up heavy metal if you're not familiar with them, and reacting to it. But the part that makes this cool is she just gets so into it, because you can just see her passion and her enthusiasm, which makes watching or listening to the song that much more enjoyable. So she just has a great personality. And then also same thing, you know, she'll watch part of the video and then stop and then give you the educational or the technical breakdown of that specific piece of it. I think I'm picking up on a pattern here of things that I like. But anyway, so YouTube, The Charismatic Voice, the reaction to Iron Maiden's The Trooper was really good. Or she did a reaction to the Led Zeppelin song. Shoot, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the song, but she did a Led Zeppelin song, and she just lost her shit in that. I mean, she couldn't stop giggling. She was enjoying it so much. So it was really cool to watch.
I think you actually did the Led Zeppelin song as a previous pick because of her.
Could be. Yeah, very well could be. Cool. All right. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of our episode. To all of the listeners, thank you so much for listening. Be sure and let us know on LinkedIn, X, or whatever your social media platform of choice is. Or if you Google for, I don't know, probably 45, 50 seconds, you'll find my email address. Feel free to shoot me an email as well. Like if every scammer on earth can find my email address and you can't, I don't want to hear from you anyway. Oh, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. But thank you for listening. Eyal, thank you for joining us on the show. This has been a cool conversation. Appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome.
Cool. Warren, as always, thank you for being here. Appreciate your added input and helping me out on the show.
Yeah, of course.
All right. And we will see y'all next week.